Hey, so sorry I'm a little late. I was finishing up reading from this week. There is so much in the Bible about David, I had no clue.
Yeah, David's kind of a big deal. What's something that stood out to you?
I think something that stood out to me was how I only knew about how David fought against Goliath, but I never really knew anything about the time as he was a king or even the time before he became king. Saul really despised David. It shocked me how long he tried to kill him and how David was so gracious towards him.
That's one of my favorite parts too. I think the story about Goliath is really important. But yeah, it does seem like that's what mainly is taught to us when we are kids. I think it fascinates us because it's another hero story about God doing miraculous things through his people.
Yeah, that was one of the stories that made me think that the Old Testament served to just give examples to follow versus not to follow. Now that I've read the whole story of David's life, I know there's so much more to learn than just that.
I know, we tend to look at the story of David and Goliath and think, I need to be brave like David. But then we look at the story of David and Bathsheba and think, I do not need to be like David. Although these are not wrong lessons to learn, that is not the only purpose they serve.
Yes, it's all part of the story of redemption and how God is bringing salvation to his people.
I'm so happy you're loving the Old Testament now.
Me too. It's so much clearer now that I've started reading it myself. It's almost like I can't get enough. Although I did have a question about the covenant that God made with David in 2 Samuel. Can we talk about that?
Sure, what's your question?
Well, I'm just confused as to why God needed to make a covenant with him. Why did God need to make a promise to David when he already made one with Noah, Abraham, and Moses?
I think it's important to understand that all of these promises are leading up to God's ultimate redemptive plan, which is Jesus. If you notice in 2 Samuel chapter 7, where God's promise is made to David, God reaffirms the promise he made with Abraham and Moses.
So all the promises of God connect?
Of course, and they even look to the future. When God made the covenant with David, it was right after David told God that he wanted to make a temple for him to be worshipped in. David thought this was a great plan, but God had a better plan. He promised David that he will build a house for David from David's offspring. He promises David that he will make his name great. He will build him a house to worship in, and he will fulfill all of these promises through David's seed.
Who is David's offspring, though?
This is the cool part. David's covenant with God finds its partial fulfillment in Solomon, David's son. Solomon was one of Israel's great kings in the beginning before his falling away, and he built a temple for God to dwell in and for the Israelites to worship him in. God chose the builder of the temple. He chose the location of the temple, and he chose the details of the temple. However, this temple and the covenant with David was only a picture of what was to come.
Through Jesus?
Exactly. Can you guess how?
Didn't Jesus come through David's line? Like David was Jesus's great grandfather, right?
Something like that. But yes, Jesus came from David's line. He was the offspring who would completely fulfill the covenant with David. Let's read the covenant again in 2 Samuel 7. In verse 9 it says, I will make a great name for you, like that of the greatest on the earth. I will designate a place for my people Israel and plant them so that they may live there and not be disturbed again. Evildoers will not continue to oppress them as they have done. I will give you rest from all of your enemies.
This is talking about Jesus?
Now let's turn to Revelation 21. How about you read it this time?
Starting in verse 1?
Yeah.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband.
Now really pay attention to verses 3 and 4.
Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more, because the previous things have passed away.
Do you see any connections here?
There will be no more pain, just like God promised to David.
And there will be a dwelling place for God to dwell with humanity, just like David wanted. Solomon provided a temporary dwelling place for God and his people, but Christ provides an eternal dwelling place through the New Jerusalem.
Wow, I'm beginning to see how powerful God's covenants truly are.
They really are amazing. Next week, we'll review and go over how God has fulfilled each promise through Christ. Every single one points to him. So it's only right we end talking about his life and how he fulfilled every promise.
I can't wait. Jesus really is our greatest hope.